Okay, so there's a few things that we're going to need when it comes to creating our barrels. So already we have our low poly. Okay, this is our game resolution mesh. It's the one that's going to end up in the engine. We are going to need to create textures, and our textures are going to be three. Those are going to be over here. We are going to have a base color map, which denotes the color of our object, a normal map, and an ambient occlusion, roughness, and metallic map, an arm map. And those three things are going to reproduce our materials for us once we get them into an engine. In order to create the textures from our low poly, we need a few other things. We need to go into Substance Painter. Okay, that's where we're going to be today. Now, Substance Painter requires two things: the low poly, which we have, and it's also going to require a high poly. So this is going to be this guy. The high poly is a more accurate version of the model, modeled more like it would exist in the real world than it does low resolution for in games. Now we're dealing with cylinders and they notoriously don't render very well. I'm also, again, using a former student's meshes here, so we're going to have a few problems with that along the way. When we bring our high poly into Substance Painter, it's going to create for us 7 maps. Those maps are a normal map. This is the one that we're going to use here. It's going to create an ambient occlusion map, which is the one we're going to use here. It's going to create a curvature map. This is going to give us black where anything sticks out and white where anything sticks in to the model. We're going to get a thickness map. The thickness map is going to determine how thick the model is at various points on the surface. We are also going to get a world space normal map. A world space normal map, along with the position map that we're going to create as well, they are able to define various points on the surface of the model. So for instance, if you wanted to put rain splashing on the top of your object, the world space normal and the position map know which direction is pointing up. Also, if you wanted to put dirt on your barrel from the ground up, again, it recognizes where those directions are. Lastly, we have an ID map. Now, an ID map is going to be pretty useless in regards to our barrel, but what they are essentially is every separate component, everything that is a different bit or piece of your model gets a different color. We can use that for generating masks. So these 7 maps are going to be generated from the high poly. That's where they come from. Now, our high poly does not need UVs. Okay? It does not need UVs. Why? Because we're not texturing the high poly. It can have N-gons. Yay! N-gons in this case are actually good. And the only thing we care about is the quality of the surface. Okay, we only care about really what it looks like. Does it look really good? If it looks good, it'll work. So first, what I need to do is ensure that my models are at the origin. Now, starting from right now, we've been working on 2 barrels, right? An oil barrel and a wooden drum, or an oil drum and a wooden barrel. From this point forward, you need only 1 barrel. Okay, we did a lot of modeling on the 2 of them because the shapes are quite different, and there's tools that you use on one you don't use on the other. So in order to teach you those tools, we made 2. The same is true with going into UVs. You UV'd this one with me, but you guys did the UVs on this one pretty much on your own. It's up to you which one you use moving forward. I am going to texture the oil drum, so I'm actually going to get rid of my wooden barrel. I want to make sure, I'm going to turn the grid back on here, that my barrel is at the origin. Okay, it's at 0, 0, 0. And more importantly, its pivot point is at 0, 0, 0. So that's what's really, really important. I have it on the ground and I have it at the origin. The reason for this is that objects in Engine inherit their pivot point from the object's location in the modeling software. So for instance, if my barrel was over here and I bring it into the engine, its pivot is going to live here and it'll rotate about that point. In fact, I can show you an example of this using my Enterprise bridge. If I go and look over behind the captain's chair, Here is the commemorative plaque somewhere. There it is. Here's the commemorative plaque for the ship. Now, if you look at this, this is nowhere near, I'm going to go to wireframe. This is nowhere near the origin, which is over here. Well, the reason I'm doing that is to alleviate any kind of level design in Engine. If I export this thing here, that far away and rotated from my pivot point, when I bring it in Engine, its position is 0, 0, 0, and its rotation is 0, 0, 0. And that puts it back exactly where it was. I don't have to go and try and place it on the wall. It just naturally is there already. So that's one thing that you can do with this. And if I show you the opposite technique of doing this, I also have a chair right here that is at the origin. So here is all the components of the chair. And my origin is right here. There's my pivot point. So this chair, you can see, is actually currently right in the middle of a console. It's obviously not where I want the chair, but it's placed at the origin and lined up with the grid so that when I bring it into Unreal, I can then place that chair wherever I want. And I have instances of that chair all over. Another reason why I want its pivot point to be down at the ground and not over at the center of the world. Okay, so those are kind of your two options. With our barrel, we want to use the same kind of mentality as what we used on the chair. We are going to be moving this thing around based off its own position in the world. We don't want to kind of snap it to anywhere else. Now, this is my low poly barrel, and I'm going to go name it as such. I'm going to give it an underscore low as an extension. This is going to tell the software that it's my low poly, but it's also something that I can use myself to identify that it's low poly. Now, some of you might have trouble doing the export. I'm going to do the export here, and I'll explain why you might have trouble. I'm going to go into File, Export Selection, and the selection part is important. If you just go to export, everything in your scene will get exported. So Export Selection, it's just going to export that barrel. And I'm going to go to my desktop. I've created a folder here called Meshes, and I'm going to put it in here. Oil drum. And this is an FBX. And I'm going to leave all my settings as default. Now, a few students in the previous section did not have FBX available to them. If you don't, you can go to Windows, Settings and Preferences, and Plugin Manager. And in here, we can do a search for FBX. This will show us the two FBX exporters and give us the ability to both load and auto-load them. So if you do this, we'll be able to then use that format. So if FBX doesn't show up for you, that's what's missing, and you need to go and do this. Auto-load will turn the plugin on when Maya starts. Load will actually load it now. So it's actually up and running while we are working. Yeah, I don't know, Jack. I couldn't answer that. Okay, I'm gonna break my barrel here on purpose because I need to illustrate a point, and I'm hoping, I just want to make sure I didn't actually break my UVs. I did not. Okay, good. So if you notice now, I have a hard surface polygon here. Okay. This is problematic. You're going to run into this on your model in several locations. I'm going to go and break another one here so that you can see this as well in a place where you might get it. So here too, so okay, that one's really hard surfaced. I've got a bunch in the bottom that are, but the one that I just broke now, you can see is running around the step here, right? You can see those vertical lines. Those are smoothing groups or hardened edges, and we want to be careful where we use them. The reason for that is that it's really hard for a normal map to undo that. A normal map in this location, it'll try to correct this, but it won't really be able to do it. So to correct this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Edges and select the entirety of my barrel. I'm going to go into Mesh Display, and I'm going to go to Soften/Harden Edges, and I'll use the options here. And what this does is it gives me a threshold, an angle that it's going to try and meet in order to either choose to soften or harden an edge. 30 degrees is the threshold here. So anything from 0 up to 30 is going to get smoothed together. And everything beyond that is going to be a hard edge. So if I hit apply, you'll notice that my barrel has changed. I'm going to deselect it so you can see this. You'll see that it's gone and fixed the top lip, and it fixed that rogue polygon that I had in the middle. Unfortunately, it also made my bevels really rigid, and I actually don't want them to be rigid. I'm going to let the normal map do the talking. So here, I'm going to go manually select all 8 edge loops that go around this thing, and I'm going to go mesh display and soften. This is going to force those edges to be soft, like so. Now that actually looks a little bit more like an oil barrel, but it's also because when we make our high poly, we're going to use that feature as well. There was also a little bit of a problem on this barrel in regards to this cap. It was floating above the surface, and I've gone and pulled it down so that it matches. Anything you have like that that's floaty is going to cause an issue. In fact, if I show you the one at the bottom, we can see the floatiness here because I didn't correct it. See how we can see underneath it? All right, that's going to be a problem. So I want to go in, I'm just going to move this edge up. Now this is breaking my UVs doing this because I'm moving the geometry, but in this case, it's such a small little area. I don't think we'll notice. It's also on the bottom of my barrel. So somebody would have to flip this thing over to see it. So there's my low. I've gone and made some changes to it here. So we're going to reset our history or delete our history, and we're going to freeze our transformations, right? We want 0s and 1s. Sorry, yes, for which settings? You get the FBX? So under Windows, Settings and Preferences, and Plugin Manager, all you have to do is at the top, do a search for FBX. This is actually when you load this, it's going to be a whole bunch of stuff here. So if you just do a search for FBX in here, it'll highlight the ones you need. And then you just turn all 4 of those things on. And that should cover it for you. So now I should be able to export this as an FBX. I'm going to overwrite the other one that I have. Again, I'm just using all the default settings. I'm not changing those at all. Okay. With that done, we have our first element made. We have our low poly ready to go inside of Painter. The next thing that we need is a high poly. Now I'm going to introduce you to some shortcut keys in Maya that we're going to use for this process. Those shortcut keys are all beside each other, and they work like this: the 1, the 2, and the 3. Okay, these are the number keys at the top of your keyboard. 1, this is going to show us our actual topology. Topology. What that means is that it's going to show us the polygons we have and the shading that we have. It's going to show us exactly what we expect. Number 2 is going to show us a sub-D modeling view. This means you're going to see a cage like this, and inside the cage, you're going to see the geometry that it's then creating. So as you move a vertex, the model ends up moving around. Okay, this is the cause and effect. This is almost like the lattice that we used before. Okay, so this is our sub-D view. Finally, number 3, this is our smooth preview. This is going to show us what our high poly looks like, but there's going to be a catch. There's going to be an error with it, but it's going to show us our high resolution geometry. So while we work here, we're going to be bouncing back and forth between these keys, 1, 2, and 3. Now I can hit them already. If I hit 1, nothing happens because we're already looking at the actual geometry on my barrel. If I hit 2, we're now in Sub-D view. So here's the cage. You can see the original barrel out here. And then here's the rounded shape inside, the Sub-D version of it. And then 3, the cage is gone, and we just see the barrel. You can see that my cap is not holding up well to being subdivided, right? It's kind of blobby and all over the place. This is what we're going to correct when we make our high poly. So to make the high poly, here's what I'm going to do. Control D. That's going to duplicate my barrel, and I'm going to go rename the duplicate instead of underscore low, underscore high. Then I can select my low poly 1 and just hit H to hide it. It's out of the way now. We're not going to destroy it. We need to make changes to it. It's there. And I now have the one that is going to become the high poly. This is the one that we're going to be using these shortcut keys on in order to manipulate what it is that we're seeing and how it is that this is working. First, let's hit 3 on the keyboard. That's going to show us a preview of what our model looks like. And if I deselect it, we can kind of take a look. Now it looks rounded and blobby, kind of smooth, but it's not the shapes that we wanted. Our 2 steps coming down off the top of the barrel are gone. The cap isn't really a cap anymore. It's kind of just welded and blobby on the surface. This one actually just kind of turned into a weird rounded shape. Our bevels are still here, but it's kind of curving the entire surface a little bit. It's a little bit more organic than we wanted. The tool that we're going to use to correct this is under Mesh Tools, and it's called the Crease tool. The third one down. I'll leave this open for a second so you can see. This tool works on edges. It allows us to crease an edge, much in the same way that you do when you make a paper airplane. If you were to fold the wing on a paper airplane without creasing it, that edge is kind of wobbly and soft. Creasing will make it not soft. Creasing will make it rigid. Let me show you an example of how to do this. If you lose track of what edges are which, you can hit 1, right? That goes back to our actual view. And I'm going to create a rigid edge on either side of the bevels. To show you this happening in real time, I am going to go back to my smooth preview. And I'm going to go to Mesh Tools and Crease. Now, this is not going to crease these edges when I click this. Instead, this is toggling the tool. The Crease tool is now on. And you get a message in the middle that says, use your middle mouse button to drag and crease. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use my middle mouse button, click, and drag to the right, and it creases those edges. In terms of visual feedback, we can see that they are now bold, indicating that they've been creased. And if I deselect, you'll see that it actually looks a little bit more like what we intended those bevels to look like. Now, there is some rendering artifacts. You can see that the normals here have not been cleaned up. This is something that we have to live with in the preview mode of this. Once we actually subdivide this, it will look cleaner. So we just have to kind of live with that. Let's go do another one. I'm going to go back to edges. I'm going to go back to my low poly view so I can actually see the edges. And these ones, I know that these 5 edges all the way around the barrel need to be rigid. This one, this one, this one, this one, and this one. Right? That's all 5 all the way around. Again, I'm going to click with my middle mouse button and drag to the right, and they're now rigid. If we look at this I'll drag to the left to remove the rigidity. And if I go to our preview, and again, I do it again, you can see that we can get our stairs to appear, our little steps to appear. Now, you can also, this is not a binary option. It's not off or on. You can actually set it to varying levels of rigidity. You can actually choose how hard or how soft that edge is. For us, all the way as rigid as it gets is going to work. So there's my cap back. this one, I could crease this bottom edge down at the bottom here, but it's actually not even going to do anything. I'll crease that one. And because this barrel is symmetrical, it's got the same details on the bottom, well, it means I need to go and do the same thing on the bottom. So there should be that edge, this one, this one, this one, and this one. There's my steps back. There's the big cap. And there's the little cap. Now, this is why there's a preview mode. So we can go and edit these things and play with them, see what they look like. And if we like what they look like, then we can commit our changes. So I'm going to deselect the barrel, and we're going to see, again, all kinds of rendering artifacts around it. That's okay. Again, that's going to be corrected when we do this for real. So if I take a look at this thing now, it does look pretty much the way that I want it to, other than the dark spots that we see. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to commit my changes and make this high poly. Now, I'm going to explain this part here. So I want to go back to my original view, view 1. I want to look at the low poly of this. We don't need the preview anymore. I'm going to explain subdivisional surfaces to you and how they work. So here is a polygon. This one is a quad. I'll do this on a triangle here as well, so you can see this. Move my barrel a little bit more out of the way. Like so. Okay. So the original geometry, is right here in black. If I subdivide it once, sub D1, it's going to find all of the vertices on these meshes, and it's going to find the absolute middle between them. Like that. Then it's going to connect them. On the quad, it's going to connect them straight through. On the tri, it's going to put a new vertex in the middle and connect them that way. This creates quadrilaterals out of a triangle, and it creates quads out of a quad. If we subdivide again, sub D level 2, again, it's going to find the middle between each vertex. And then it's going to join them. So in this case, cross here, there, and there. On this one, we get the same thing. Dots in the halfways, dots in the halfways, and then it joins them. So this one's going to go here. This one's going to go here. This one's going to go here and here. And this one's going to go here and here. And then rinse and repeat. Sub D3. Again, we're going to get another split evenly across all these polygons, giving us more topology. And the same thing is going to happen here. We'll get more topology this way, like that. Here's the problem, is that these are really small numbers, but what they're doing is taking our polygon count from the original model, and it's being multiplied by 4. That number starts skyrocketing. Now, even if you have a triangle, while that first break only gives you 3 polygons, it's then multiplied by 4 for every step there. So these numbers, we've got to be very careful with them, which is why I'm explaining this right now before I go and apply this. To apply the actual mesh smooth, we can go to mesh and smooth. And I'm going to use the options here. Actually, I won't use the options. The dialog opens regardless. And here's our number of subdivisions. Right now we are at 1. So every polygon has been split in 2. If I middle mouse click and drag to the right, there's 2 and there's 3. Be careful when you do that. It's really easy to make this number really high and break Maya. If this number was 7 or 8, there would be too many polygons on screen, and this thing would not render correctly. Here now, we can see the actual high poly version of the barrel looking the way that we want it to look. That looks quite nice. This can then have its history removed, make sure it's zeroed out, and we can export it. Again, I'm going to export selection so I only get the one. Now, I'm going to put underscore high at the end of this thing. Now, one of the nice things about Mesh Smooth, if I go and look at the UVs here, you'll notice Mesh Smooth hasn't broken the UVs. They're actually still exactly as clean as they used to be. That's really, really nice. But there is now a high poly version of this. If we go and look at the little bevel going around here, right? We've got a slightly soft corner there. It looks really good. We've got our steps looking pretty good as they go around that corner. So again, increasing the polygon count was done via the mesh and smooth option. Okay. There's also an icon right here that'll do the same thing. It's the little white one, which is low poly, and the orange one, which is higher poly. With that exported, I actually have everything I need to go into Substance Painter and begin slapping some textures on this. I'm going to do that now. I'm going to save this so that I can work on it later. Let's go put this in the right folder. And I'm going to say File New. Okay. When you get your File New dialog, you don't want 3DS. If you've applied your Mesh Smooth, you don't want to preview it in high poly anymore, right? You're going to get way too much geometry on screen. Once you've smoothed it out. Okay. In Substance Painter, I'm going to use the default template. So I'm not going to change the template here. I'm just going to use the default. That is a PBR, or physically based rendered set of textures. And then I'm going to choose my model. That's the next area down, select. So I'll hit select. I'll go to my desktop where I've got my meshes folder, and I'll go and grab the low poly. Now, the reason we're choosing the low poly is that's what we're texturing, right? We don't want to texture the high poly. It's not going in game. And if you look at the file size between our two objects here, you can actually see the change that we get. My low poly is only about 40K. It's really, really low. There's not a lot of information there. The high poly is over a meg, so it's quite a bit larger. So, with the low poly selected, I'll hit open. And then we got to pick the size of our texture. Now, this is not set in stone. We can actually, during the process of texturing, res up and res down if we need to. I'm going to make my barrel at 2K. That'll be plenty of pixels to make this thing look polished. And then I don't need to work out anything else in the bottom here. We're going to use everything else as defaults. And so I'm going to hit OK. The first thing you have to do when you import a mesh into Substance Painter is just go look at it. Make sure that what you smooth in your modeling package is smooth here. And what you made rigid is also rigid here. Sometimes you might do something on your model and it shows up in here in a completely different way. And then you're going to have problems. Currently, I'm looking at the 3D view. Up here in my UI, there's a little TV screen icon that when I click on it, gives me the option to actually load 3D and 2D so we can see our UVs and our mesh. 3D only or 2D only. I primarily work in 3D only, but it's up to you how you want to work. Next, we have our display method, the little drop down. This shows us what we're looking at on our current piece of geo. That is its material. I can go to its base color, which it currently doesn't have any. So it's checkerboard. Its metallic value, also checkerboard. Its roughness value, how rough or smooth this object is. Again, nothing there. We haven't textured anything, so all these things are blank. Below that, we have the 7 maps that we're going to look at. Our normal map. Currently, it's all completely flat in color, so there's no detail here. Our world space normal map doesn't exist. The ID map doesn't exist. The ambient occlusion is flat white, and so on. All of these things need to be created. Now, Simpsons Painter has a bad habit of messing around or altering its interface with every new iteration that comes out. And so while you're going to have all the interface icons and buttons that I have, you're going to probably maybe need to go look for them in somewhere else. They're always going to be named the same things, but they often have shifted around or moved over and whatnot. You can actually undock them and go and move them yourself if you want to. I've gotten really comfortable with this layout, and it's kind of the one that I use all the time. Over here, I've got what's called my layers, and this operates kind of like Photoshop. So again, we've got varying properties that we're going to be painting at once, right? It's not just the color, but it's everything else. We're painting its metallic value, we're painting its roughness value, we're painting its ambient occlusion maps, we're painting all of these things at once. So like Photoshop, we have layers here, and if I use the drop down, I can choose which property of our material we're seeing in that layer. So when you paint on the model, it actually paints all 5 material properties at once. So if I were to, for instance, put this back on material, I were to say, let's paint red. Let's paint a metallic value. Let's paint no roughness, so it's shiny. We won't paint anything in the normal, but we can give it some height. So when I go and do this stroke on the model, that's what it's doing. It's shiny. You can see the reflection in there. Make my brush bigger. There we go. So it's shiny, it's metallic, it's red, and it's raised off the surface, or at least it looks like it does from the height. I can make the height negative, and we can push into the surface as well. Each of these properties is being painted at once on this layer. If we go look at the base color for this layer, there's going to be some red in here. We can see this in our 2D only, right? If we go look at the base color, we've got some red and nothing else. If we look at our metallic value, we can see that there's white in here, denoting that, yes, we want it to be metallic. If I go to roughness and roughness, here I'm painting how much roughness I have. In this case, I wanted none, so there's none. And so on. I can go to the height, and there's height. You can say I did a negative stroke and a positive stroke. I'm going to switch back to the material and back to my 3D only. And I'm going to go and delete this layer. Now, there are 2 types of layers that we have inside of Painter. We have fill layers, denoted by the little paint bucket, and we have paint layers, denoted by the little paintbrush. Those layers act different from one another, but we can actually use them in conjunction with one another. So we can create a fill layer and add a paint to it, so we can paint on top of it. Or we can create a paint layer and then add a fill to it, so you can fill on top of it. Now, everything that I'm about to show you is not really the proper artist pipeline. We're going to be doing a lot of shortcuts and things like that because, again, you guys are game designers, and the idea here is that you just need something that looks good enough to get in Engine to play with, and not something that is going to be a finished, completed asset. So we're going to be taking a lot of shortcuts here that I tell artists, no, don't do that. For you guys, though, that's okay. So first, we need our 7 maps. Those are located in the texture set settings window. Here I'm going to move my properties down so we can see that. In the texture set settings, we can see I'm on a material currently called Lambert 1. I'll call this oil drum. We have a description of this material if we so wanted. So if we were doing a much more complex model with a lot of varying different components, we could go and name what this material was and give it a description here. We have its resolution currently set to 2K and the shader that we're using. We then have a list of the outputs, our color, metallic, roughness, normal, and height. Then below that, we have our baking properties. Now there's actually 10 maps here. They've added an additional 3, but we're not actually going to use them. And by default, they're not even turned on. Those are the height map, bent normals, and opacity, but we're not going to use those. So here's the baking process. I'm going to click the Bake Mesh Maps. When this dialog opens up, I'm currently in the Common Parameters. First, I'm going to set my size to match my output. I want to bake these 7 maps, the same resolution that I'm going to use in my texture. If I bake them too low, they'll still work, but they won't do as good a job in creating our materials. The next thing that I want to do is load my high poly. Here it says high definition meshes. I'm going to go and hit the little sheet of paper, and we'll go and choose the high poly mesh and bring that in. Now it hasn't actually imported it. We just told it to import when it's going to bake. That's why this didn't take any time. Next, we'll go down and we're going to leave all of this stuff the same until we get to the anti-aliasing. Anti-aliasing is a little bit of an oxymoron. It blurs your image in order to make it look sharper. So you don't see individual stepping of pixels. You'll instead see them kind of blend together a little bit to look smoother. I'm going to turn this on as high as it goes, 8x8. Since we only have just our one mesh, we don't need to worry about matching and we don't have to worry about naming. With that done, I'm going to leave all of the settings on everything else the same. And I'm going to go hit Bake Oil Drum or Bake Selected Testers. Because we only just have that one material, these buttons do the same thing. If you had 5 different materials on your barrel, however, this button would hit the texture you currently have selected, and this one would bake only the oil drum one. So I'll hit Bake, and we should see the normal map get generated, the world space, the ID map, the ambient occlusion, the curvature, position, and thickness. Now I can actually see the details on my barrel the way they showed up originally in Maya. Now we're going to get some artifacting along the top, and you'll see this right here. There are ways around this that we could do to fix this, but for what you guys are doing, it's fine. Essentially what's happened here is because our barrel is so low res compared to where all those points were up here in the curved one, what we're getting is the overlap between the two here creates a little bit of scalloping on the model. Once this is textured, you'll barely notice that that's there. And if you actually look at the far side, the normals actually read the right way. It's only the stuff closest to us that really reads as broken. You'll see this is the case on the bottom and on the top. This happens most of the time when you bake anything that is cylindrical. You'll get these little corners of kind of ugliness, but for everything else, it kind of matches what we. When you do your baking, make sure that you can see your 7 maps appear in their proper spots. If one or more show up as just solid black, it means that your low poly during the baking process did not see the high poly. Again, all you have to do to fix that is just make sure you're not matching by name and you're not using any kind of naming conventions. With a single mesh like this, we don't have to do that. You also need to make sure, like we did in Maya, that these things are exactly in the same place, the high and the low. If not, they won't see each other when they bake here. With those 7 maps done, I'm going to go back over to my layers and I'm going to go back into my shelf, the area down here, and I'm going to go into an area called Smart Materials. Smart Materials are a collection of layers that have already had things done to them, and they've been saved as a preset. These include things like, let's see, one that works here, feverish skin. I'm going to go and drag this sphere into the layers. When I do this, you can see this thing kind of looks fleshy. This is a folder in which there are multiple layers that are referencing our 7 maps that we made, and they're doing various things in those layers. Somebody set this up and made it work the way that it does. You can make your own smart materials by setting a bunch of layers up to do something, and then just making sure that you save that folder out. This one's called machinery, and it's meant to look like caterpillar equipment or construction equipment, a bulldozer or something like that. We got dust on the top. We've got scrapes in the paint with rusted metal underneath. We've got this kind of splotchy paint here. You can see that it's not very clean, the paint. It's very dirty. There's a lot of scuffs and things. And then when you go down to the bottom, there's some dirt and stuff there too as well. Again, this is all done through a variation of layers all set up to do something specific. Now, some of the materials that we have here are going to be quite beneficial to us. The one that I'm going to use, I'm going to go and delete this. And you can go play with any of these things as you want. As an artist, I typically make my own version of these. I won't just use the ones that are here. But because you guys are designers, that's fine. You can use the ones that are here. I'm going to grab this one. This one's called Steel Painted Stained. And I'm going to drag it onto my model. When I do, we get this blue paint that's kind of scuffed up a little bit. And there's some kind of nicks in the paint that we can see the metal through. That's okay, but I think we could probably get higher quality. I'm going to delete that one using the little garbage can. The one beside it is called Steel Painted Worn. Well, okay. That's starting to look a little bit more like I believe a barrel looks. Now, I'm not going to use it just like this. There's a few things I don't really like. First, the pits and little nicks in the paint here, they look too big to me. They actually look oversized. Well, we can adjust that. I know that in this smart material, those nicks are coming from the height layer. So I'm going to switch my editing mode from base color to height. And this is the opacity for the height. I can turn it all the way off and all the way on. We can see what that's doing. The same thing is true with base color. If I go to base color and I play with the opacity, we can turn off and on the coloring. Each property of a material has its own opacity slider. It's kind of like having 7 layer editors together, or 5 rather. So again, I'm going to go to the height, and I'm just going to adjust this until it looks a little bit more natural to me. That looks a little overkill. I still want to have it there. I still want to have some damage in it, but not make it as pronounced. So maybe something like that. I'm at about 60% or so. That looks okay. Okay, it's a start. If I go and look at what an oil drum looks like, we want to get some reference here so that we're actually doing this the right way. I'm going to go and take a look, and it would appear like all the ones that contain oil, usually black. It seems to be a pretty common color here. There's a green castrol one. Look at this one. This one's beautiful. And all the damage and dents and rust and stuff. So cool. I think that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to put the word oil on the front of it. Kind of like these guys. Oil. I won't do it as a logo, though I probably could do that. I'm just going to use the word. I'm just going to write oil on top of the barrel. Yeah, like these guys. All of these ones. I think that's going to work quite nicely. Okay. I'll move my reference over. So first, I need to make the barrel black. In order to do that, I'm going to open up the folder. I'm going to go back into my base color here. And I'm going to go and investigate where the red color is coming from. The bottom layer, the very bottom material, we have metal, dirt, rust, paint. If I open this up, I can see that we have 2 layers for paint, shiny paint and worn paint. And there are the colors associated with them. So cool. My shiny paint, I'll go and select that layer, bring the properties up, and here's my color. I don't want it to be red. I want it to be blackish. Now, even doing that has already made this thing look a little bit better. You can actually see how much rust was here. It was harder to see that before when it was red because the rust was being lost. This actually looks a little bit more like the old one we saw. That was really cool. You'll also notice that in changing that color, the worn paint too has changed on its own. These layers are linked in a way that allows me to edit one color and the other one edits. So if I were to go make this, let's say, blue in color, you can see that the worn paint is also pulling that blue color. There we go. Nice black barrel. Now, I would like to put the word paint, or oil, rather, written on this. And I'm going to do that with my base color here. I'm in the paint folder. It makes sense. That's where it should go, right? I don't want to put it in between the rust or above the metal. If this is where the paint is, then I should put it there. In fact, it should go right above the shiny paint. I'm going to, with that layer selected, add a paint layer. This is going to be my letters. Now, originally when I painted the barrel, my settings have persisted. They're still here. I'm painting in red with metallic value, no roughness, normal, and height all being adjusted here. I don't exactly want that. In fact, the only thing I want to paint is just color. All of the paint value that's here, I already like that. So I'm going to turn off my metallic value. I'm going to turn off my roughness value. I'm going to turn off the normal and the height. And now I'm just going to paint with this color. If I go and do a swipe through here, I can see how that's going to behave. And indeed, I'm getting red paint on top of the black paint. And the damage is still there. I'm going to hit undo because I don't want a red stripe. And I want to put the word oil written on here. To do that, I'm going to return to my brush. That's the first icon here. This gives me how my brush is going to behave. The second icon is your alpha. And you can think of that as the tip of your brush. You can see that this one's got a little blurry circle. And my brush has a little blurry circle. Well, if you look at this icon, circle with a checkerboard on it, the same icon is down here in the shelf. This is a collection of alphas. This means that we can take anything that's in the shelf and we can put it on the end of our brush. So, if we wanted this to be a fleur-de-lis French barrel, I can go and put a fleur-de-lis there and stamp that on the barrel. I'm going to hit undo because that's not what I'm after. We can make some bloody handprints. It's a really big person. Doesn't touch this barrel. If I scroll down, there's a whole bunch of these. In fact, you can bring your own in. Some of them actually really make sense. Here's an explosive warning. Might be good if you made a red barrel. There's also biohazard symbol. Maybe this has come from, I don't know, a hospital. Don't open it up. That's gross. There's all kinds of little things here too. There's the other biohazard. What was the other one? No, the other one was radiation. Here's the biohazard one. So yeah, all kinds of these things that you can go and do, little icons that you can bring in and stuff. You can make one of these in Photoshop by just making a black and white image and dragging it in. This one's called frog skin. It's kind of gross. So what do I want to do? I want to put some text on here. Now, there are images of text. This one says open. This one says pressure. There's private, pull, push. Well, none of these things say oil. So that's not going to work for me. I can't go in, edit the text here. I only just have whatever it says. This actually isn't text, even though that is what it looks like. It's actually just an image of the text. So we can't go and edit what it says. However, if I scroll up a little bit through my alphas, I'll get to a few of them that say substance. These ones are actual fonts. These ones are text that can be edited. So I just need to find one that looks appropriate for what I'm doing. I'll use this one, I think. And I'm going to drag it onto the alpha. Now, if I click, it'll say substance, which again, it's not what I'm after. Here, I'll go and change what the text says. Oil. Oil. Now, if I go to my brush, I can make the brush bigger to make it fit. But you notice it's not quite nearly as big as I'd actually like it. Here, what we're looking at is the size of my brush is in relation to the size of the object. At 100%, it's about as big as the object is. We can actually change the way the brush is behaving so that instead of paying attention to the 3D object, it pays attention to the 2D object. Here in the brush settings, something called the alignment. Currently, I'm on tangent wrap. And what that does is it makes it so that if I click across an object like this, it stamps it across the two objects that are there, the cap and the barrel. I'm going to switch this to, say, UVs. Now, if I click where the cap is, you notice it only appears in the cap and not on the barrel around it. That's because it's being aligned to the UVs. So when I click here, it clicked it, and you can see this actually lines up with my UVs. So even though my brush was on an angle here, the rotation matches so that it's always straight in UVs. Next, after setting the alignment, I'm going to go to my size space and change it from object to texture. And now I can get my words to be really big. Oil. That's cool, but it might be a little too big. So I'm going to go and bring my brush size down. Maybe we'll do one on either side. Maybe we'll do two of them. One here and one here. Yeah, that's near about 50%. If I go and turn this thing on here, I can see my wireframe. So I left 1, 2, 3, 4 polygons between. If I go to this side, I left 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A bit there. It looks like I'm going to undo, paint again, and put it there. Now, if you notice this, if I go in here, one of these triangles, one of these polygons shows up as a triangle right there. I triangulated that, which means there's actually something going on my polygon there. I'm not going to worry about it, but it's indicating that there's something going on there. I may want to go and investigate. Okay, so there's oil written here. I'm going to undo that and do it again. And the reason for that, go to 2D only, is that I didn't want to write it in red. I'm going to go to my material. We'll change the red to be yellow. Yeah, that's going to look better. Maybe what I'll do is I'll just do one. I'll do one right in the middle here. Oil. So now, if I return to 3D view, we'll look around. There it is, oil. Now there's kind of something funny going on here. If you look at the paint, bring my brush size down. You look at this, all the black paint was scraped away here, and there's rust underneath. Well, it's cool, but shouldn't the yellow paint be scraped away too? It doesn't read as being the same paint job. It actually looks like I just went and painted oil on top of a material. The reason for that is that there are things going on with these layers that are referencing the shiny paint. And they're not looking at my layers, my letters layer here. So to make this look like it's a little bit more cohesive, I need to add some wear to my paint. To do this, I'm going to add a white mask to it. So I just right click on the layer and add white mask. This creates a mask that so far has no holes in it. Then I'm going to right click on the white mask and I'm going to add a generator. Generators are procedural methods by which we can add more detail affecting various parts of the way that the image is being affected. So this is the mask. So a generator is going to generate some detail in the mask. If I click on my generator down here, we can choose which one we want. This one's called Dripping Rust, and it's kind of the same thing that's on the barrel already. So if I select that, you can see that we're actually getting a very similar wear in the yellow paint as we are in the black paint. I can go into this and adjust just how strong that is, so that it looks like it's actually making a little bit more sense. It actually is a part of that barrel. That's cool. I'm going to add another detail here, and this one's going to be a lot of fun. Substance Painter has another set of tools therein that are pretty unique to this software. You saw me use a brush. I'm going to go and create another paint layer here, and I'll move this one above our steel painted. Okay, you've seen me use a brush just like this, and I can go and clear that alpha so that I just get the tip of my brush, and I'm just painting on it. You've kind of seen that kind of thing work already. In here, if I go to the brush tool, this is the shelf again. Half of these brushes behave the way that Photoshop ones do. So for instance, if I go and grab Felt Tip Large, and I were to go and I'll use my stylus for this, and I'll go and paint high, it's like somebody wrote it with a highlighter. It looks like a felt tip pen. If I go and grab, let's say, this one, a rake. If I go and paint on the surface with this one, we get someone dragging a rake across the surface. Some of them contain multiple setups. So for instance, this one, gradient, the longer I paint, the more the color changes. Some of them, like this one, create bullet holes. This is affecting the height, the color, and the metallic value, making it look like somebody shot this thing. These ones are cool. They actually have a fair amount. This one's called an ivy branch. And I can go and click on my model. It's going to save here as it does this. There we go. And I can drag on the surface, and it creates ivy along the surface. That's neat. This one's called fir. And this one, you can see, is spitting a bunch of little dots all over the place. Well, this one is the unique type of brush to painter. This, if I put my cursor over it and you look at the pop-up, it says, actually this one only says fur. Let me do it with the broken glass one here. The broken glass, when you look at the pop-up, says broken glass particle brush. Now what a particle brush is just that. It spits particles out of your brush. So if you wanted to break some glass, you could just click in various places and the particles will paint along the way. Each particle is itself a brush. Some of these things are really cool, but watch this. I'm going to do a search in the brushes for the word leak. And here we have some leaks, some heavy leaks, and oil leaks. Well, cool. I'm going to double click the oil leaks. This is going to create a particle brush and a material assigned to it. So watch this. I'm going to go to where my cap is, and I'm going to click and hold, and just kind of paint a little bit around the cap. Okay, something like that. So I've got a little bit of oil leaking out from the top of the cap. In fact, let's bring that oil right up to the side, like this. Well, when this particle brush hits a vertical surface, it'll actually start creating particles that drip down the surface. In this case, leaking oil down the side of my barrel. When they actually get down to where the ridge is, you'll see them actually pay attention to the ridge and curve around it, just like oil would. So now, not only do I have a barrel that says oil, but I've gone and given it a little bit of uniqueness in the fact that we have some little splooshes of oil that have come out the top of this thing. Now I'm going to go and reset my brush because I don't want to keep that one on. I'm just going to double click on the basic soft, and I'm going to go to the material here. We'll kill the alpha. And I don't really care about the material too much. We'll leave that as is. So there. I now have a pretty decent looking oil drum that can be brought into the engine, and we can use to do all kinds of things with it. The next thing we need to do is we need to go and actually get this thing out of Painter so that we can use the textures. And this is part of what you're going to be handing in. I'm going to go to File when I'm done, Export Textures, and we can go and put these things on our computer somewhere. So there's a couple of things you need to pay attention to here. First, the output folder. Well, I'm going to go put it on that meshes folder on my desktop. That's where my low poly is. The next thing we need to pay attention to is the output template. So because 3D models can be used in a wide range of places, right? We can render them in just about anything. We want to export these textures so that they work where we're going to use them. If your plan for the rest of the semester is to use Unity, then using the drop down, you can go all the way down to the bottom, and here is Unity. You can use the Unity HD Render Pipeline Metallic Standard. Or you can use the Unity Universal Render Pipeline Metallic Standard. And when you do this, it's going to configure your files so that they work with Unity. Since I'm going to be using mine in Unreal, I'm going to go just below the Unity ones to the Unreal 4 Act. And I'll click on that. That's going to set my materials up so that they work with Unreal. You don't need to change anything else here. I'm going to leave them all the way they are, and I'll hit Export. And then, once I get a export successfully finished, I'm going to hit Open Output Directory, and I'll go take a look at what got spit out. Oil drum base color, oil drum normal, oil drum occlusion roughness metallic. Now these names are not actually any good. First, where the names are coming from. It's first using the name of your mesh. In this case, my mesh was called oil drum, so oil drum. Then it's using the name of my material. In this case, I renamed it to oil drum, so it says oil drum. Then it gives me a descriptor of what this material is, what properties of the material it is. In this case, this is the base color. Well, None of this works for me. I'm going to go rename this. I'm going to call it oil drum underscore, actually not even underscore. I'm going to use period 1, period BC for base color. I'll rename the normal map. This one is going to be oildrum.1.n for normal. And the last one, I'll go and rename oildrum.1.a for ambient occlusion, R for roughness, M for metallic, ARM. Now, the reason I'm exporting these in this way is that while we are simply simplifying our assignment here, we're going down to a single barrel. We can actually, we still want to create variation in that barrel. So you're going to end up with 9 textures when you're done. I've made an oil drum with leaky oil on it, and I've got my 3 textures for that. When you're done, you can then go make another barrel. You can go make an explosive barrel. Make it red, put a little flame guy on it, and call it a day. You can go make a corrosive barrel. Here's one that says Monarch Oil. There's a blue one. Right, there's, whoops, I don't actually want to click on these things. There's an old-fashioned oil one. There's one similar to what I made. Here's a red one. Here's, look at this one's got leak down the side too. This is what you need to make. 3 variations of your oil drum. It doesn't matter what the variations look like, but it should be more than just a palette swap. These ones, I can see the same, right? The same little shapes in the rust on both. So you probably want to play around with them a little bit more to make them a little bit more varied. Because when we make our assignment in Engine, where we explode the barrels, every time we spawn one, we're going to spawn a random barrel. So we're going to make 3 variations that hopefully makes it look like we've got an entire collection of barrels that are constantly being created. So any kind of these variations that you see here, all of these would work really, really well. Motor gas, this is here. There's 3 variations right there, right? Shell, biohazard, and a blue one with some oil coming down. So I've only got the 3 here. That's what the 1 is for. So I'm naming it mesh name, which version I made, and then the what type of texture it is. When you hand these in, you should hand in 10 textures, and please do not zip them together. I want them all separate. The reason for that is that when I download them from Slate, when I download them from the school's website, it zips them again. And so if you zip them and then the school's website zips them, I'm going to spend all day unzipping here. Okay, so you're going to end up with base color times 3, a normal map times 3, an arm times 3, and your low poly. Those are the 10 files you hand in for this assignment. Again, at this point, you do not need to work on the second barrel. If you'd rather paint the wooden one, by all means, go to town, paint the wooden one. But you only need to make 3 variations of 1 barrel moving forward. If you want to do the other barrel, that's fine. You can do that as well. But the grades are only going to be generated from 1 barrel moving forward. You can, but there's no benefit in doing it. You know what I mean? You can go and do that, but it's not going to gain you anything other than, well, I mean, it's fun to do that too, but it's at the expense of time that could be used on assignments. And so be careful with that, right? So that's it. That is the entirety of this. I would go and say file and save this so that I have access to it, right? I can open it again if I want to make changes to it. And then when you start over and you start making your next version of your barrel, you can go and start with one of these other materials, and start going to town on that. Another thing that you have available to you, I'm going to open this guy up again, is there's a website called Substance Share. And Substance Share is a community driven website that has all kinds of materials in it. So if you go down to, let's say, smart materials, and we go to things like metal, there are 68 metals in here. So you can go and find something that might fit exactly what you're doing. This one looks really nice. Look at this. Red oily machine. You could just download this file and drag it into the shelf in Painter and be done with it. This, again, is not exactly what I would recommend an artist do, right? Artists need to make their own materials. These are all procedural, so we're going to get barrels that all look pretty identical to one another, which is not really how you want to do this. But again, you guys are designers, and the task here isn't to get you to be creating AAA artwork. It's to be able to get you guys to be able to create something that you can use in Engine and have it look correct. And so any of these would work. You can go and download these things. If you got to log in to download them, but they're all free to grab. And so yeah, you can go and play around with these things and see how many you can do. Again, you've got to make 3 unique barrels. And so you can go play around with that. And then that's it. That is the entirety of this assignment put together.